force and reason, force and agency, are diametrically opposed. They are an either-or relationship. You cannot have one without the other.
In the model itself, there is a moral assertion that reasoning is better because it's the only alternative is this power thing.
And religion at that point becomes an opioid for the masses to control.
Even if that's true, you can still assert that if you have a reasoning function that plays a part, then you get to move away from that power dynamic.
Religion is actually designed to cultivate godly attributes in you so that you become more free.
Truly sovereign is actually its willingness to lower itself and lift everybody else up rather than make everybody else lift him up.
In Christianity is this upending that whole, you might say, slave-master dichotomy, that it's granting divinity.
One sec, because that was so much, and this is so difficult
This topic
to do.
is dense, man. It's profound, but it's dense. It's complex.
Welcome to Peterson Academy, Dialogos. Today, I will be Khaden. Will be giving a proposal. Josh will be my listener, my lead listener, with Chris and Juan as secondary listeners. We have Scott as a scribe and Parker as the herald. Okay, I'll begin with my proposal. I wrote my thoughts out, and so I'm going to read them and give them to Josh. This is based off of I've currently taken, I don't know how many philosophy courses, 15 or something from Peterson Academy, but I'm currently working through philosophy of politics, and I just got done working through, I think his name is radical Islamist Qutb's philosophy. And so a lot of these ideas are kind of spawning from making a comparison between Qutb and Augustine. But what I have written here is kind of my concluding thoughts of a post I laid out the parallels of Augustine and Qutb's metaphysics, their view of the state, and their epistemology. And this was kind of my concluding thoughts. This proposal actually has nothing much to do with Augustine and Islamism, but that's kind of the context. So here is my proposal. These thoughts seek to uncover an axiom of my philosophical stance, the sacred centrality of man's reason. I hope to build a dialogos together from this axiom, Josh. So both Augustine and Qutb neglect reason in favor of force. Their epistemological standard is might makes right. Despite such an epistemology being only fit for a short, violent reign of barbaric tribal savages, suppose that they can be right in their independent of their might, even if their metaphysics is correct, and even if the truth claims they made by their interpretations of Islam and Christianity do indeed track with reality. The process of disrespecting reason, man's agency, will frustrate any lasting claims to the truth. Even if they could structure the world into the exact image of truth through force, their utopia would be a mere hollow imitation of the truth. It would be a form of the truth, but it would lack the animating spirit that is man's reason. It would be void of love, which is the gift of life man gives through his reason. This is why men are alike, even if they profess beliefs that are unalike. The means by which they bring about or assert their truth claims, their epistemology, is a better testament to their philosophy than any amount of pontification of ethics, dissertation of metaphysics, or declaration of theological creeds. How one does philosophy has to be as noble as the very philosophy they seek to uncover How one does philosophy has to be as noble as the very philosophy they seek to realize. As for me and the axioms of my philosophy, which I have been seeking to uncover through all these philosophy courses at Peterson Academy, it is the sacred centrality of man's reason. Such an axiom demands reverence for man's rational faculty as a sacred right. the dignified respect of man's free volition by never robbing it through force or manipulation, and holding man accountable as the creature of reason he is. God respects agency, our agency, even if man tramples it underfoot by for his own foolish ends. Although men may hold beliefs unlike one another, if they learn to respect the agency God grants to all men, they will be more like God than whatever beliefs separate them. To respect agency is the first principle man must build upon if he seeks to know God, or you might say to know ultimate reality, to be in connection with truth. Quote from Ayn Rand: "Do not open your mouth to tell me that your mind has convinced you of your right to force my mind. Force and mind are opposites. Morality ends where a gun begins." So the axiom I'm kind of laying out here for you, Josh, is that force and that I'm building this proposal on is that force and reason, force and agency are diametrically opposed. They are an either-or relationship. You cannot have one without the other. They are inverse with each other. So my proposal, for any institution, so family, marriage, whatever social arrangement we make, agreement, for any institution, religious practice, or political organization that we hope to create or sustain, it must cultivate man's agency, his rational volition. From the least, the most least in that society or that agreement to the greatest, if that system is to be generative, adaptive, and enduring. All right, there's my proposal.
Okay, so what do you view with the edge cases or the point where reason starts and where it stops? Because there are maybe cases where you can't find a reasonable option. Yeah. So like and also, what is the scope of reason? Should ultimately as many things as possible be things that can be reasoned with or arrived at through reason, or is it just things which we can or is it just things which are sort of in the proper domain? So for example, is religion something of faith, but then the things we build on that reasoning? I'm wondering what the scope of this is.
All right, let's go with the first one. And then we'll go with the second one. Where does reason begin? That's what you're asking, and then what is the counter to reason? And I'm laying out reason and force. Well, I think reason is your intellect, the care you bring to a given situation that you're going to actually think through. You can do something without thinking and it not be forceful. That would be automatic or habit, but that's not forceful. What I'm laying out here is where reason ends is whenever you are doing something, and I'm kind of connecting this concept of reason to and our ability to be rational thinkers, to be rational agents. I'm connecting it to choice, because what Ayn Rand lays out in her book in Atlas Shrugged is that you cannot, to actually think about something, you have to be free. If you are being forced to do it, ultimately you are going to turn into a robot or a mindless machine or a cog in the machine because you are being forced to do it and you're not actually acting like the rational man you are. So the line dividing reason to when it's not reason, there's one. It can be when you're doing something out of habit, but I think what picks up from that is this virtue of love, because you care, you don't need to think about it, but it's still participating in your day-to-day life for the greater good. The second one is when someone compels you or manipulates you, or placates, you might say, to your emotional susceptibilities through marketing or manipulation. They're trying to get you to not think anymore and to act irrationally. That would be where reason ends. So you might say the normative stance I'm taking here is that reason has to be preserved. When you relate with other people, you have to relate with them in a manner that cultivates their rational faculties. I'm not going to placate to your lower whims when we're having a discussion. I'm going to try and connect with you, Josh, mind to mind. I'm going to try and always hold that in every single relationship that I am accountable with to.
Okay.
Does that explore or address your question on where reason ends?
It does to an extent. I mean, I guess I'm wondering now, what type of reason are we talking about? Because there's logical reasoning, which is like the beginning and the end of the argument. When you can show something is true with logic, it's final. But there's another kind of reasoning, which is maybe more rhetorical, maybe more playing on the field of various ways of looking at it, to where two people can hear the same reasoning and one will go, I like this, and the other one will go, I don't like this. So what is the definition of reasoning here? You're saying it's attached to the sort of free volition, being able to, in your own terms, come to it. But there's also an argument that can be made that, well, if you're coming to a conclusion using your reasoning, maybe you're using the tools that were given to you. Maybe those tools are a result of your position in society as well. Are you able to reason then if even the tools you're given are inadequate or something? I'm trying to define what is reasoning, what quantifies and
I
qualifies.
think what I'm trying, so I think the differentiation, because there's tools of logic and that people can have more. I guess you can refine tools of logic, mental capacities to bring to bear on a given situation, and then you were kind of playing with that multiple perspectives. I can see it from here, I can see it from there, and I think those are all valid. What I'm trying to get at here with reason, I'm trying to differentiate it necessary from per se logic, where if A then B, kind of that's a form of reasoning, because there's inductive, deductive, eductive, all these sort of forms of logic. Reason I'm trying to kind of understand here is with almost like a capital R reason, or you might say Heidegger's idea of Dasein, this thing of attention and being that you bring to bear. It's the care you give to any certain thing enough to actually think through it, where you're actually reason for me is for my understanding, it's a process where you're directing attention and you're doing this attentional thing in a given situation to work through it. And you can use the tools of logic to do that. You can use the tools of taking on a different perspective and using empathy in that manner. But it's this type of care that you overlay, that you bring to bear in your life.
So how does that differentiate from force then? Because force, you might think of something as it's still a form of having your attention on something. You're bringing your care to something in a very particular way. So
yeah.
So how are we differentiating force?
Well, force is you're compelling attention, and so I'm going to benevolently torture you so that you'll pay attention to Jesus Christ, so that you'll convert to my religion. Augustine's example. That's different. And then John Locke makes a huge argument against that authentic faith, authentic religion. This is the argument he makes in his letter concerning toleration. For it to be authentic, you cannot have any compulsion, because then it's like a facade. It has to come, you have to bring your Dasein, if you're going to use the word Heideggerian language, you have to bring your care to bear on it. That cannot be compelled. Obviously, you can still think through situations, but when you're thinking because you have a taskmaster beating your ass to do a certain project, you're not actually taking into account, your reasoning, your rationality is not participating in the most high principle it can be in your life. It's participating just enough to satisfy the demands of your conquistador torturer or your taskmaster or whatever or your prison camp guard. You're just trying to get through that arena, and you're not actually bringing your faculty to bear on a higher order principle. And so you're not actually connecting this thing of you're just thinking enough to get through the day. You're not actually expanding your reason, your consciousness to the most highest principle it can be. And so it's not authentic.
Okay, then another definition, clarification I'm wanting to work through with the reasoning is So reason in this context doesn't have any clear logical or constructionary definition. Reasoning is a set of tools we use to go through something. Could we then define, in this context, reason is the set of tools that somebody would have used if they were in a position of power? So if you have the two cases, one where somebody is able to use reason, and one where somebody just uses their power to just forcibly make something happen, would you then say that the reasoning is basically unpacking the reason behind why they would have chosen to do something using power? In some sense, if you have a religious leader who is saying we should do this, going through reason is going, instead of going off this person's authority, we want to know exactly why they did that in the first place. We want to have the information that they had so that we can come to our own conclusions. Is that what reason is in this context?
Yes, that would be authentic reason. Or maybe if you're going to use, you would use the tools of I'm going to persuade you so that you can obtain the same experience, perspective as I am. You're not going to go based on my testimony alone or virtue of my, in religious context, virtue of my connection or priesthood to heaven or the realm of the gods. I am going to lay out step by step how I got to it, what you can do too, so that you can also participate. Yeah, you can take your inner heart, your rational faculties to also have the same testimony, same experience I am having. You're not going to take my word for it. I'm going to lay out these ideas. I'm not going to compel you to follow me as a religious leader. I'm going to lay this out and you're going to do the work yourself. That would be persuasion. That would be in line with respecting reason.
Now,
Man's volition.
you also mentioned Plato's Philosopher Kings, and it's worth maybe noting why Plato thought this was a good idea in the first place, or at least maybe why I imagined he thought this was a good idea, and that is that not everybody can be a philosopher, because then who's going to do the work? So how do we then reconcile? I'm not trying to be too challenging here. I'm just trying to unpack
No,
the
challenge
substrate.
away.
Okay. So then what do we do in cases where not everybody can necessarily be something? So maybe you have somebody who dedicates their life to politics and they know the ins and outs, and this is why systems are set up the way they are. People elect a representative to then vote, because not everybody, at least this is what it said, can be somebody who has enough skill to know it. And this is what I think, imagine Plato is saying with his Philosopher Kings, like, can it work in all contexts that people can have the reasoning, or is it just some context, or is it a goal we're moving towards, but not necessarily one that can be immediately achieved at any moment along the way?
Okay, so I think we're starting to step into theological waters here, because I do find Plato's view, perhaps it was fit for that time, that in a slave society. But what I see in Christianity is this upending that whole, you might say, slave master dichotomy, that it's granting divinity. It's anointing. The first followers of Christ were followers of the way. They were little Christos, because to be Christian is to be anointed. That they were anointed with that sense of divinity, with that reason, and that they could actually be free acting agents in their own life. And I believe that is the ultimate destiny of Christianity, is that from the least into the greatest, just to quote Jeremiah, all shall know the Lord, from the least into the greatest. No one will say unto me in that day, knoweth the Lord, for they will all know the Lord, from the least into the greatest. I'm framing knowing the Lord as deep epistemological knowing reality. But you can know God, you can exercise your reason in the degree, in the circumstances, in the life to you've been placed into. And so God, you may not be called to be a politician in life, but you're called to be a good father. And that in your ministry as a father, you are accountable, and you must bring all your reason to bear, all your care to bear into your family unit. And if you are so called, you are put in a situation, you're put into the arena where you do have to be a political leader. That is your calling, and you have to bring your rational faculties to bear on your role as a politician, or your role, whatever situation you're placed into, whatever microcosm you're placed into. You are, you might say, the atom, the man, the rational thinking agent, the micro god in that little world, and you are accountable for it, and you can bring your reason to bear. And so what I see in Christianity is that there is a room. It's kind of like Jordan Peterson's subsidiary hierarchy, where people can expand themselves fully and take responsibility in the tier, in the domain by which they are placed in. And so I don't see, there's no cop out where I can just be a mindless automaton doing nothing. Now, of course, I can't compel you if I think, oh, you're not living up to your potential. I can't say you're a loser and I'm going to compel you to do it. That's between you and your consciousness. That's between you and God. That's why Christianity has the Holy Spirit, because it's going to draw you out and expand your domain of reason, you might say, in the arena. So, yes. So to answer your question, there is room for there is huge room for subsidiary distribution of reason, you might say, or distributive cognition in any system. You need that, because not everyone can do everything or it'll be combinatorially explosive. So you need to have tiers in which people can give their full selves in whatever position in life they are in. So long as it doesn't, I think what happens where it gets problematic is when you start interfering with that, when you start having, you might say, too much top-down compulsion on a system, and you rob people of their agency. That's when the whole system starts to go awry.
I have a question. Would you
Yeah,
say,
Juan.
what I'm hearing is reason being compared with the term Dasein, which I understand something as being present, like caring for something, giving attention, but being like presencing the thing that you are paying attention to, right? So like it's kind of like a participation into the being of all the beings that are exist, like in existence, right? Or the being that is like more salient at the immediate moment where you're acting on the world, right? So I think yeah, and then you say, okay, the main proposition is for any institution that we hope to create or to sustain, we must cultivate man's reason for it to be sustainable, right? But my question is, what about when when something is pre-rational? So, for example, like things like relevance realization, which is like key for cognition or intelligence, it's pre-rational because think about like the example that Rebecca makes of when you say, for example, this or this or this, this is it has a term. It's called
demonstrative reference.
Yeah, performative reference. So like when you're doing performative reference, that doesn't have any type of rationality behind it. You're just like making something salient, and then I'm telling you like this, like this. Just that has to be pre-rational, pre-categorical, because categorization comes before we. So relevance realization is pre-categorical because before I can make the categories happen, before I can classify something as something, I need to point it out to you, and then we have to like abstract all of the common features, and then we can create a category of something, and then we can start having like reason and logic between us, right? In a conversation. So like that has to do with like the whole concept of predictive processing, like, so when you're doing predictive processing, yes, you're using reason, but there's another aspect that is like a pre-rational, or like you need to like break a frame completely, which risk being irrational while doing so. And then you have to reconstruct another new frame. You know what I mean? Like one of the reasons why, for example, the 9 dot problem is so difficult is because like we are framing it as a connect the dots problem, right?
Yeah.
So it's easier for our brain. Our brain is like saying like, hey, it's smarter if you treat this as a problem that we already know, and that is the rational thing to do. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes you have to take a step back and think, break the frame that you have, which risks being irrational, and then
Yeah.
reconstruct the frame again. That's why like the solution to the 9 dot problem is
Would it be better to say
go
call
outside
it
of the box.
pre-rational instead of irrational?
Well, I'd
Because
say
it sets the constraints, or it sets the framing of any given situation so that your cognitive faculties, your reason can, the logos within you can give meaning to it, but it's not irrational. I think invokes a lot of almost Rousseauian ideals, of no thinking at all. Whereas pre-rational, it comes before, it precedes. It's the handmaiden to
yeah.
reason, you might say.
Yeah, that seems like a good distinction to make. Yeah, because
Mhm.
perhaps irrational, it just means to like disregard rationality altogether. Pre-rational is perhaps like there is some rationality in it, we just haven't like connected to what we're, like with the framework that we're working with right now,
Mhm.
right? But then in those cases, it's still like not rational yet, like which kind of like implies like we need some practices that are at the very least pre-rational as well to fit in our system or like our model to be able to build good institutions. Because what happens then, this actually it's very cool that you brought in Heidegger, because I just did the second lecture on postmodern philosophy, and on that course Higgs combines, so it's like he's combining in most of these lectures like two sides of a similar
Mhm.
coin. And then he in that lecture he puts like on one side Freud, right, with his notion of the id, and
Mhm.
which is instincts, and then the ego kind of like putting controlling the id, right? So it's
Yeah.
this idea of force, like
Mhm.
something kind of like constraining something by force kind of thing, right? Like because
Mhm.
the ego is kind of like there's this, the superego gives the ego all of these standards of society by which it's like supposed to like act appropriately, right? And then
Mhm.
like it suppresses down by force the id, right? All of the desires
Yeah.
of the id. Whereas like and then Heidegger is like on the other side. He's not saying like is not on the side so much of like, no, being is not something that we just kind of like we have these internal drives and then we just kind of like suppress them to be able to cope socially. He's like what being actually is like this type of like participation into the entirety of like being itself. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
And so like there's like this, can you see how like it kind of like relates to this, like when you compare say reason and force, and there's like a
Mhm.
little bit of both in there. You know what I mean? It's like,
Mhm.
yes, you kind of need some type of a structure and something like you cannot just say like, okay, it's just going to be completely like a debate and propositional, like that we're going to like argue it out until we find out the solution. There needs to be also a type of hierarchy kind of thing that needs to be in place, and there needs to be kind of like a type of like reverence for authority, but at the same time that authority at the top
So
cannot just be completely forceful. It needs to be an invitation. You know what I mean?
so I would push on this. I don't think man, I have so many examples coming up in my head with Moses in Israel, and he has to be almost a tax master for them because they're slavish minded. I do think the model of force is appropriate, apropos, but it's needed, but it's not the ultimate end in itself. I think you may
No,
need
definitely.
to submit yourself to discipline to learn a new skill. And at times you may have to use force upon yourself. But that is not the end. Because if you're always using force, all you grow up being a slave in a sense. You never get to the promised land. Ultimately, what I think any good system has is I think when systems become ossified is when they get too fixed on when they don't see the hierarchy of authority as a means to an end, when they see it as the end in itself and not preparing the lowest, the least, to actually take on more responsibility, to be free-thinking agents for themselves, to become more like God, to use the theosis doctrine. If it's just to continue to do the same thing ad infinitum and to be mindless about it, to pray, pay, and obey, you're nothing better than a slave. And religion at that point becomes an opioid for the masses to control. But if your religion is actually designed to cultivate godly attributes in you so that you become more free through your participation in the hierarchy, where you get to the point where you're no longer beholden to the hierarchy, you might say, or you're no longer a slave to it, but it has lifted you up. That is I think that is a proper model. To get a little bit esoteric here and to go to First Temple period Judaism with the temple. In the first room of the temple, you have sacrifices being offered, certain rituals, much more bloody, you could say. All these things are being offered in the courtyard of the temple. And that's kind of the outermost out part where these outward law of Moses type rituals are being performed. You see this in the Sermon on the Mount, where it starts with the fulfillment of the law of Moses, and it's Torah, Torah, Torah. Law of Moses is outward rituals, behaviors. But then as you get to the second room of the temple, the holy place, the attitude, the stance changes, and it's no longer outward ordinances. It's more prayer, communion type of rituals that aren't behavioral, but more, you might say, cognitively, more fixing your attention in expectation for what's to come from the next part of the procession of rituals, which is the priest coming out of the Holy of Holies. Or in the Sermon on the Mount, it moves from law of Moses to the law of the prophets, and there's more praying in the Sermon on the Mount and fasting and praying the Lord's Prayer. So you see this pattern. Eventually, there is a progression that needs to occur where you're no longer stuck with this lower law of Aaron, law of Moses, someone beating you, to the point where you can actually be your own philosopher king in your own to your own degree. You can have the Spirit of Christ in you, animating you. So it's no longer compelled, but rather you do it from your heart.
So, am I understanding this correctly then, that this dichotomy between reason and compelled sword power, this dichotomy is not just a assertion that this is the way it should be. It's a description of these two different components, to where, like, when I first heard this proposition, it sounded like it was maybe just an assertion that, well, logic is better than enforced power, because I was thinking, like, well, but then how do you reconcile that with Nietzsche, who says that everything you do is, even if you build up reasoning on top of that, it's just an excuse for, or just a exponent of your intentions in the power. Yeah, and the postmodernism. But now, as I'm understanding your model, I'm not sure if I'm understanding this correctly or if this is actually implicit in what you're saying, but it seems like your model suggests that in the model itself, there is a moral assertion that reasoning is better because it's the only alternative is this power thing. So even if the postmodernist says, like, we can't know if something is true or not, or everything is just power-based dynamics, even if that's true, you can still assert that if you have a reasoning function that plays a part, then you get to move away from that power dynamic, where whether or not the reasoning is true, whether it's not all this stuff, it's the faculty of reasoning is basically just taking what was once a purely power derived system and breaking it apart so that the individual who would have made the power decision is. So I guess what I'm saying is, like, is this also a logical proof in a sense for why reasoning is better than power-based dynamics?
I wasn't framing it that way.
Okay.
But I mean, it's certainly more preferred. And now when you articulated to me that in that manner, reasoning, I think it's better to learn by precept than by sad experience. That's what makes man unique, is that we actually have the capacity. We don't have to learn every experience, every hardship in real time. We can actually tap into culture, read our scriptures, read the accounts of others, and we can craft our life based on reasoning, so we can have a map instead of just jumping into the terrain, so we can actually navigate the terrain properly. That's reason. I don't need to force my way through life. I can actually sit back and think it through and go through the world using my reason. That is man's gift. And so I do think, Aristotelian notion of this, that is good. That is the ultimate good, is man using his reason. It's way more preferred to not use your reason. On objective grounds, I think it's better to use your reason than to just operate by a system where might makes right, or where you're just constantly contending haphazardly in the moment, pragmatically, to the whims of Mother Nature. To be able to sit back and observe the cycles of the season and to make a plan, that's better.
So then,
so you can plant your crops in advance, because you're able to use your reason to track the cycle of the earth and the seasons. That's reason. I don't have to rob someone for my food when early spring hits and we ran out of our grain store. No more food on the ground. So reason keeps us from being violent.
I was thinking of, so that's the like way of reason being this function for seeing farther into the future using sort of sophisticated tools. This is, I guess you said, not implicit in your original model, but it seems like the application and implication of this dichotomy, either it's reasonable or it's a power dynamic, is that it's something like power dynamics is you have one unit that makes something happen. And this idea of reasoning by being primary is almost like we take this power dynamic function, let's say it's a brain, where all we have access to is the output, and we are exploding it into all of its subparts so that in some sense it's more high resolution. Where if it's just a power thing where somebody just decides what happens, then there's no way to work out how good that decision is. But if we are exploding it into its parts and we have laid it out in maybe a premise conclusion format, then it's a higher resolution way of looking at it. We can actually address the layers to the decision that was made.
I think with this power dynamic and blowing out the resolution, I immediately thought this is where my mind went with this, because there is a lot of conflict when you have this is going to the Hegelian view of history, where you have the master class and the slave class, and there's a struggle of recognition, and a lot of conflict happens is when the slave starts gaining enlightenment and the master's like and and then the lower working class or the other lower culture is going to overthrow the next culture, and history unfolds as a thesis, antithesis, synthesis. Constantly, it's this constant struggle for recognition. That's Hegel. Where you're bringing out here is when you are able to use reason and you're able to implode and able to get the functioning of this. And here's what I thought about this idea of theosis, this idea of Jesus Christ, his role as the comforter, his role as Emmanuel, which means God is with us. What Christ does, you might see him as the ultimate master, and all of us are slavish, boorish. like pigs here in the dirt. Yet Christ comes down and condescends. And part of his role as Emmanuel is to succor us and teach us and bring us to abide with him, to make us more like him. But what is that? What is required? What is Christ, the archetypal Christ, doing in that? He's coming down to our level through the incarnation. He's coming down into our world. He is becoming a slave, you might say. He's becoming man when he takes upon flesh. He is leaving his heavenly estate to become like us. This is back to Christianity. When you use reason, you are blowing up, you might say, getting a high resolution picture of man's fallen state, or to use Hegel, the slave's fallen state. And what you are doing, if you are a Christian, a true follower of Christ, you are doing this for people below you. Is you are seeing that, you are comprehending, you are having empathy. A lot of times before Christ performed a miracle in the scripture, his bowels were filled with compassion. Compassion comes from the Latin word compate, something like that, but it means to suffer with. You are with them. You are experientially, your Dasein, your being is with the people you are ministering to. You are seeing them, you are discerning, you are judging, so that you know how to succor that person to develop them, to be a Socratic midwife, to bring about their enlightenment. So, answer to Hegel, where he has this right, maybe where he has this wrong, is in this power struggle that's going to occur between slave and master. What a true master does, who is filled with the soul of Christ, a Caesar that has the soul of Christ, is they condescend and they bring the lowest up, and they meet them where they're at to bring the whole up to a heavenly level. But they're using their reason, preceded with love, from that place of love, to not deconstruct the slave and to push him down so that they can assert their power anymore. They're using their reason to not deconstruct, but to edify, to uplift, to bring them up. And it is an act of condescension. That is a sacrificial act on part of anyone who has a greater degree of intellect or reason to do that for others. And that is what it's like to be Christ.
So what I'm hearing is that likely Hegel has it wrong in his framework, because he assumes
correct, maybe a correct diagnosis of fallen man, but a wrong prescription.
Yeah, like what I'm saying is that I think Hegel he's very right in your diagnosis of it, but I think like where he goes wrong is because he assumes a postmodern outlook, and he assumes that civilization is built up on force, basically.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and what you're saying is no, it's not like that. It's built on, yes, there is some type of authority, but the authority, what makes something truly sovereign, is actually its willingness to lower itself and lift everybody else up, rather than make everybody else lift him up, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's the true king.
That's the true king. And what makes other people kings under the true king is being able to recognize true nobility or true sovereignty, right?
And I would
then,
add
like,
to emulate that in their own
and then,
sphere.
exactly, yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Because then
Yeah.
if you can, like, obviously, like, if you recognize true sovereignty, then you admire it, and admiration, like, what would you say? Imitation is the highest form of admiration, and so
Mm-hmm.
like then you'll be like imitating and then becoming basically like what's sovereign, right? But and I love this whole framework. I think is very profound. But would it be reasonable? And now we I use that term again. But would it be reasonable to say that instead of using the word reason as the foundation of like healthy institutions, would it be reasonable to say that it would be better to put agency / accountability plus faith as the foundation of a healthy institution? Because what I'm trying to get at with including faith into the equation is because like I was like trying to point out before, that there is a sense in which you actually do need some type of authority, you know, that at some point, because like you were saying, we cannot, as humans, like it becomes, trying to analyze everything, it becomes combinatorially explosive. And so at some point you need to have a way of discerning easier, you know, what is the appropriate action, and for you to commit to it even before it's rational to you, you know?
So
Because like
this is so Juan, I think this is probably a good place to stop on this proposal, because now you're bleeding into the next proposal.
yes, that's why I said like before, I
Yeah.
think that those two proposals are very, very
Yeah.
intertwined, and I
So
really like.
let's put a pin on it right here and call this proposal good, and let's jump to the next one. But let's pause for a second. And let's hear if you're okay with that, Josh, you're the lead listener. Yeah, let's pause here. We'll pause the recording, but after we hear a report from the Scribe and the Herald. And then Scott's going to become the listener next. Parker will be the Scribe, and Chris will be the Herald. All right, let's hear it. Scott, so see where we've gone, see what ground we've covered so far. And you are on mute. Okay,
Yes.
there you go.
One sec, because that was so much, and this is so difficult to do.
Yeah, it's a hard. You're gonna stumble through it your first time as Scribe, but you get better at it as you practice. So.
And this topic is dense, man. It's profound, but it's dense. It's complex for sure.
I'm
Yeah,
always happy to
pretty
be
incredible.
like, now you understand. More people understand my suffering.
Yeah, it's a really big ask to talk for an hour and then have someone be like, "Here's the meta of that conversation."
Yeah,
That's like, that's
Yeah.
incredible.
Give it your best shot, though. Yeah, try it out.
Okay. So the proposer, I'm just going to give like spark notes because I have a ton here. I have like a full chapter's worth, but I'll try to look at it and then just pull what I think is important. So the beginning, this is so difficult, y'all. The proposer gives his proposal, which is for any institution, religious practice, political organization that we hope to create or sustain and must cultivate man's agency from the least to the greatest, if that system is to be generative, adaptive, and enduring. Okay, so then the listener begins with questioning edge cases, I guess, to kind of, let's find the edges, points where the reason starts and stops. Then the response is it's intellect, not automatic. That would be forceful, and where it ends is choice and freedom. Reason is when you do something out of habit. When someone compels you, it's when reason ends. Then we go on to what type of reasoning are we talking about, because maybe there's some confusion between logic and reason and definitions. We're trying to clear that up. The proposer goes to, the listener, brought up tools, and the proposer said, yes, those are amazing tools, but that's not exactly what I'm talking about. I'm talking about this mode of attention. Reason is more of this, absolute attention that I'm free to engage with. And then the second listener comes in, Chris. Okay, how are we differing force? And there was some metaphysical things brought up. You must be free to make your own choice on your own without the majority of your attention. Listener one chimes back in. In this context, can reason be the set of tools for someone to use if they have power? Like a religious leader saying we should do this, and maybe someone asking questions to come to their own. Y'all are going around this idea of like, should we appeal to authority, and should we build these ideas around? Just give everybody the information, kind of like how printing press and newspaper and yada yada. Like you just give everyone, let them figure it out themselves. That's kind of what I gathered was being bounced around. This is so dense and insane. So then we start to get into this pre-rational and interrational talk, and I couldn't even follow that because we're talking about something so complicated, like this and this. Does pre-rational matter? Is irrational important? I don't think we were necessarily on track because we were still trying to figure out exactly what reason meant in this context, because it was taking the word and maybe stretching it. So listener one comes in and says reason and this reason and this compelling idea, this power stuff, is a dichotomy. Maybe is an assertion that logic is better than the asserted power. Then the proposer says, I wasn't really framing it that way, but I think that it is probably the preferred method because, I think it's pretty obvious maybe we don't want to lean to power dynamics. And the proposer starts to build on this idea of like we can learn and pass down knowledge instead of having to just go through the world and relearn everything. And then listener one, builds on that and says, reason allows us to break things apart instead of blindly accepting, this is what I say, do it. Then we go into some Hegelian topic where we talk about this slave and master topic where we're trying to figure out if Hegel is right or wrong, and maybe we think that Hegel isn't completely right because we'd still like this freedom and agency. And we finally end with we like the idea of the boss leading by example. We like it when we have a model, and this is a very powerful relationship that we have with Jesus, is that Jesus is willing to come down to our level and be one of us, and then also lead us towards being where he is. Wow, that was hard.
Thank you, Scott. That was good.
That's really good.
It's hard, and I do apologize. Following my proposals are like I give proposals that are on the edge of my understanding, so they're going to be a web.
It's good
Yeah,
though. That's good.
But
I didn't really know what to do other than write down as much as I could.
You giving that back was actually really helpful to kind of bring what Juan and Josh and Chris were saying and kind of tie it in. And I thank Josh, and I thank you for your questions, Josh, because you made me think about my proposal in a completely different way. And I actually, through that discussion, if you notice, some insights occurred to me because of your pushback. So
cool.
Yeah. Let's hear. Thank you, Scott. Let's hear Parker now. You have a quick Herald report. What did you notice?
You're muted, sort of. You're not muted on this end, but we can't hear you. Nope, can't hear you still.
Parker's having technical difficulties.
Did you select the right microphone?
I'm working on that.
Oh,
there you are.
Oh, good.
Okay.
Okay. So I'm mostly focused on Khaden, Josh, and Juan. Khaden began his proposal kind of like what he's getting now. Like it reminded me of kind of like if laid back was like, okay, cool. Like come at it would go a less aggressive come at me, bro. Like I want you to challenge me. I want you to take it. Okay, when you're connecting thought, you get by pinching your finger. when you use the word machine, you have your fix, your hand, your fix. I can tell a lot of your thought about. I can tell a lot of thought about you guys talk about what you use to click your fix. There's a line dividing, critically. Well, you use critically handling thinking a lot. Oh yeah, when you talk about the highest good, you immediately like went up over everything all you just from below here until you get the word highest good, and you immediately just went all the way up here. Connecting mind with mind. When you talk about working, you use a lot of like working, moving, reasoning, action, like guiding along. Um, oh yeah. And then when you're talking about making what life and what people demand of you, you can fix again. Josh is a really tough cookie to crack when being a Herald for because he's very particular. Well, he doesn't use a lot. He doesn't use just your like Khaden does to map out his thoughts. A very low gesture person, except for um when he punctuates to opposing view, he'll like he has like reason and then fork over here. And when he's talking, he'll often like talk about reason over here, like he'll use just really low level judgment to like kind of punctuate his thought. Then he'll talk about the other topic over here. There's there's company even talking about like you go like this a lot, but you then use the word we, and when you use the word we, you kind of drag your finger like talk about we, and then you could from model like well oh yeah you when we talk about the overcoming model of whatever you guys are talking about, you may kind of big picture. The first thing I've noticed about Juan is when Khaden was talking about no power or influence can be used by virtue of an authority or a priest or a connection with the heaven, you were really vibing with it. Like you were actually like grooving along with what Khaden was saying. Like that really resonated with you. Oh yeah, because you conjecture all to like kind of punctuate your thoughts as well. But while Josh's are more like close and kind of in this kind of frame, your are kind of all out here. Um, oh yeah, so when you're talking about the ego, um, before you mention the ego compressing the id, you eject your ego like this. You're already using a compression motion. Um, Again, you use the fit for authority. But okay, this one's real interesting. When you first talk about authority, you use the fit. But when you talk about authority, but in connection with faith, you actually open your hand instead of using the fit. I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
that's
interesting.
why the trick was just there chilling and
All right.
I love all the Herald reviews because when I'm talking, I'm not really thinking much about what I'm doing. Like that you said like that.
Yeah.
I'm just I'm just talking. But it's very interesting, like a lot, like yeah, it's cool. I love like hearing the Herald report.
Thank you, Parker. Thank you, listeners, for listening to this. Stay tuned, and we'll release the second part of this soon.